The Los Angeles Chargers have re-upped star safety Derwin James. He becomes the highest paid safety in the NFL. What does that mean for the Chargers? What does that mean for the safety market in the league? We'll compare James to some of the top safeties in the NFL and check in on Brandon Thorn's tiers, defensive lineman tiers. Who are the best defensive linemen in the NFL? Very few elites out there, according to one of the best scouts of defensive line talent, Brandon Thorn. All that coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL on Twitter. Get those Twitter Tuesday questions in early for next week's episode. Today, though, we're talking about Derwin James, who has become a mega millionaire and gotten his huge second contract, which becomes the highest paid safety in the NFL. Of course, we're going to talk defensive line tiers as well. And there's a couple of really good defensive linemen on that Los Angeles Chargers roster. They're building a superstar defense over there, Matt. We'll see how it all comes together in 2022. But the big news is Derwin James signing a 4-year extension, averaging $19.1 million per year, making him the highest paid safety in NFL history. The deal includes a record-breaking $42 million guaranteed. James makes a record $29 million in year one. The contract done by David Mulligetta of Athletes First. That tweet from Ian Rappaport breaking some news, and I love the last sentence there, because if you ever wondered where any of these newsbreakers are getting their information, it's from the agents.
The agents, right?
It's like this. It's like, oh yeah. I think it's pretty clear. There's no more secrets now where they're getting their information. The agents are very good at trading that information to the Rappaports and the Schefters of the world. But congratulations to Derwin James on his new contract.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you're the agent that brokers the deal for the richest safety in all of NFL history, which I have no problem with. He would be the one that I would pay the most of everyone in the league. I think he's the freakiest safety in football and one of the freakiest defenders. Extremely important in this Chargers pseudo-Rams style of defense. The only negative on Derwin has been durability, and he's coming off, I think it's a labrum issue. He's only 26 years old. They don't seem worried at all about the labrum or whatever he's coming off of. He just does it all. I mean, I saw some numbers today about where he's aligned last year. I mean, the slot out wide for 10 to 20 snaps, something like that. In the box, blitzer of all gaps, whether it's the edge or coming up the middle, man coverage versus the Kamaras of the world and the Mark Andrews alike. Like I think when they play the Chiefs, hey, Derwin, you got Kelsey, we'll give you a little help. And I mean, how valuable is that? Great first to run, range, tough, attitude, leader. So I have no negatives except durability to talk about with James.
Chargers head coach Brandon Staley agrees with you. Here was the quote on Brandon Staley, who was talking about Derwin James and what position he plays. And he said exactly that. Quote, "I don't look at Derwin as a safety. I look at Derwin as an impact player. I think if you were just looking at him as a safety, that wouldn't be doing Derwin justice. For me, I look at him as a defensive back. When I see him, I'm like, that's a defensive back because he can play anywhere. He can play either safety spot. He can play corner. He can play star or money. He can rush the quarterback, and he can make impact as a blitzer. He can make an impact in man-to-man coverage. And then he can make an impact in zone defense, whether he's playing low or high, and he's our signal caller and the heartbeat of our defense." So, wow.
Pretty good.
If you could lock people up in man-to-man, play zone, play every spot. Oh, and get after the quarterback a little bit, which we'll get to in a little bit. They've got a lot of guys that can do that already. Yeah, the talent is clear with Derwin James. Now he's just got to stay healthy. And I think this contract, really for a guy who's only been healthy half of his NFL career, he's played 4 years in the NFL. 2 of those have been mostly injured. So for him to be able to still pull down this contract with the injury questions around him, and obviously what he could be if he continues to stay healthy from here on out.
Yeah, and this actually leads to something we'll talk about later in the show, but the Chargers, like the Rams, where Staley came from, really want 3 difference maker, or as many as they could get. But I mean, a couple game-changing Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Derwin James types. And I know Ramsey and James aren't the same. They're both total freaks that went to Florida State, and they're about the same age. But one's a corner and one's a safety. But where I'm going with this is, Staley even mentioned the star position. Well, that's really what Ramsey plays with the Rams, in that the Rams and Staley before believe that if I just put Ramsey on an island like he's Dion or Revis, well, then he doesn't impact the game enough for me because my other 10 guys are going to get picked on. I want a guy near the line of scrimmage, big, physical, does different things all the time, which is what they ask of Ramsey and is what they ask of James.
And I don't know. I guess we could compare Ramsey and James. I mean, corners get paid more than safeties in this era of football, and they always have. But when it comes to how valuable safeties are, and we're seeing the money come up for those safeties, and we see that Derwin James has a $76.4 million contract over 4 years, $19.1 million per year. It's the most ever paid by safety, which means it's always the most ever when it's the most currently.
Right.
And that's more than a guy who just signed last year in Minkah Fitzpatrick. And you've watched a lot of Minkah Fitzpatrick. Mm-hmm. So what is the comparison there? And, it's not a surprise that Derwin James went just barely over the top of Minkah's contract. Minkah's was 4 years for 73.5 or something like that, almost $74 million. So basically $18.5 million for Minkah per year, and, a little less than $1 million more per year for Derwin James at $19.1 million. Are they the two best safeties in the league? How would you compare those two guys that came out of the same draft class?
I think they're the best 2 safeties. I mean, Justin Simmons and Byard and some of the not super high pedigree guys that didn't just, not everyone knows as well, are in the conversation as well. And there's a lot. I mean, there's 10 to 15 really, really good safeties in the league. And it seems like the elite ones are getting paid. The middle-class guys really aren't. And then you can get bargains on starter types. This is a bit of a stretch considering their age. But I kind of feel like Minkah is the Ed Reed and Derwin is the Troy Polamalu, of this era of they're the 2 freakiest on good defenses, but very different, even though they're both safeties. Minkah, since he's been here in Pittsburgh, has really been the single high guy. And that has immense value, and it's very rare because you don't have to play as much too high because your single high guy can cover so much ground. It allows the 10 guys in front of him to be very, very aggressive. But I have a strong inkling that Minkah's role is about to expand. Like when Baltimore Steelers happens, I think Minkah this year is going to play man coverage on Mark Andrews. I think they're going to start doing some of those type of things because DeMonte KZ, that doesn't sound like much, but the Steelers haven't had anyone that could play free. Now KZ can be the backup free, allow Minkah to do more stuff. And the Chargers have a lot of those type of guys in place. I mean, their defense is loaded. Derwin's going to do a ton of things. So they would be my 2 highest paid safeties, especially considering age, body of work, overall talent, versatility, importance to their respective teams. But I do think Derwin's worth a little more.
Yep, and we're starting to see a lot of teams do that where they're bringing their best player down into the slot on those important downs and covering slot receivers, tight ends. And we're seeing, the blur between tight ends and receivers in the NFL as well. And I think it's only going to continue. And some teams are drafting purely nickel guys higher than they ever did. And some of those guys are being paid too. And so the line between corners and safeties is blurring. So very much positionless football. And when teams target the slot so much like they do now in the NFL and find their best matchups there, you've got to have a good player matching up on the back end on your defense to combat those players on offense.
Yep, 100%. And some of this evolution, I know we've talked about this in the past, is the Welkers and Edelmans of the world are getting slowly phased out from the slot. I mean, I think people now want Mark Andrews. The Steelers are going to put Chase Claypool there. Like big-bodied slots that can block a little bit, also have some verticality to them. Like, with all respect to Edelman and Welker, they're not deep threats. Like the Chiefs would put Tyreek in the slot. AJ Green played in the slot when Cincinnati there. So I think bigger body guys that can get downfield against the Mike Hiltons of the world are what teams are looking for more and more in the slot. So therefore, safeties have to be the one to combat them.
We're going to check in on the best defensive linemen in the NFL, Brandon Thorn's defensive line tiers for edge players and defensive tackles. But this note kind of leads right into that. An interesting one for the Chargers per ESPN Stats and Info. Derwin James' new contract that averages over $19 million per year. Now the Chargers have an NFL high 4 defensive players making $15 million per year. And all those guys are under contract for at least the next 3 seasons. Wow. And 2 of those guys, it's pretty clear who they are and what their position is in Nick Bosa or Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. Yeah. And so we will check in next on where they rank on Brandon Thorn's defensive line tiers, the best players.
Isn't it nice to have a superstar quarterback on a rookie contract?
Yeah, exactly. At some point, they're not going to be able to pay all those guys. They're paying a really expensive center as well, and a couple wide receivers. They're not going to be able to do that once Justin Herbert gets that new contract. But for now, load up and let's
go win.
All right. It's almost the start of the NFL season. And obviously everyone loves this time of year. Things are getting going. You're seeing some pads popping on TV, seeing these preseason games. And if you're into sports betting or fantasy, you need that competitive edge to win. And that's why we recommend the Elias Game Plan app. It's the ultimate sports betting and fantasy companion for the NFL, NBA, and Major League Baseball. And if the name Elias sounds familiar to you, it should. Elias Game Plan is the only sports app from the most trusted name in sports statistics, the Elias Sports Bureau, the official statisticians of U.S. pro sports leagues, including the NFL. Their app lets you access team and player stats, head-to-head team comparisons, Elias Insights from the Elias Sports Bureau's research team. Perfect for the preseason. Get your player previews to help you draft the winning fantasy team. Go beat your buddies. Go win some money, whether it's in fantasy or sports betting. Team previews so you know what to expect as the regular season kicks off. Expert game analysis for betting, building your fantasy team, and, of course, bragging rights with your friends. So take our advice, download the Elias Game Plan app today. New features available all the time. Take your game to the next level. The NFL season right around the corner, so don't wait. Find the Elias Game Plan in the App Store or Google Play today. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. And Fantasy Week is coming up next week. However you play, get the latest NFL fantasy draft tips from Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty, which is hosted by Matt Williamson. Plus, starting August 22nd, we're bringing you daily top 10 lists for Fantasy Draft Week, Locked On Fantasy Football and Locked On Dynasty, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, checking in on Brandon Thorn's list. And we go to Brandon Thorn because he's probably both of our favorite trench lists, trench scouts, right? And he charts things, and he's all about offensive linemen and defensive linemen. You can find him on Twitter, Brandon Thorn NFL, and his trench warfare. I get the emails, the trench warfare emails, and I love those. And he breaks it down better than anybody. And you got to go subscribe to his trench warfare Substack if you want to, get all of the analysis. And he's got write-ups on all of these guys. But we just want to talk about his tiers and where those tiers are at. And actually, the first big surprise on the tier list, I mean, it's a mild surprise, but he's got Joey Bosa over teammate Khalil Mack of the Los Angeles Chargers, and he's got Joey Bosa in his elite tier. He's got the top 25 broken down into 4 tiers: elite, very good, good or above average, and then solid traits with flashes for more. Those are the top 4 tiers. And the elite tier only has 4 players. And it's got both Bosa brothers. It's got Myles Garrett, and it's got TJ Watt. And I don't think it's a surprise that some of those names are in there, but I'm a little bit surprised that Joey Bosa is his number 2 edge player in the NFL, just ahead of little brother.
I'm a little shocked too. I mean, I think 99% of these lists that you see, and my list would also reflect this, would go Garrett or Watt, Nick, Joey, and those would still be my 4 elites, but Joey would be 4, and TJ or Myles would be 1. I was a little shocked and slightly offended as a Steeler guy that Watt was last of those 4.
I know Myles Garrett is such a freak, but with the seasons that Watt has put together, Watt's 1 for me.
I think so too. The production is by far the best of all these guys, especially when you look at his career, sacks per snap type of thing. Watt is way better than the others. But I do think that they're clumped pretty close together. They're all about the same age, except for Nick's a little younger than the rest. But one misconception, just going to throw this out there, is Bosa, Watt. I still hear, oh, great effort players, which might have something to do with the color of their skin, is all I'm saying. But they're tremendous athletes as well as great hustle players, as is Myles Garrett, and tremendous technicians. I don't think Garrett's quite the technicians of the Bosas, and I would say Joey's the best technician of all these guys. And I don't want to get into the write-ups because I want all of you to subscribe to Brandon's newsletter and Substack. But one thing he does hold against TJ a little bit was he pretty much he exclusively lines up on the defense's left side. And Brandon, who does phenomenal work with offensive linemen, just think that the level of competition of right tackles is easier than the left tackles.
And I think eventually Nick Bosa, maybe I'm biased because I do cover the 49ers, but I think
Sure.
Nick Bosa is going to overtake Joey by a pretty clear margin. And maybe this year, just because he does have a little bit more juice, a little bit more athleticism and burst to get after the quarterback. Joey's a little bit bigger, both insane technicians, and all these guys are. You're not going to be a great defensive lineman. Like, being a freak is important, and a lot of these guys are. When you see Nick Bosa, the way he came into camp in shape, and Joey, they work out together. They built their own facility down in Florida, and those guys, like, I don't know what they do, but it's insane the shape that they come in. And Myles Garrett was a freak of nature when he was 15 years old. So he's
right. He's the prototype.
Dude. But yeah, he's probably fourth of those four as far as technique and really production. I think could grow for both Nick and Myles. I think they have a level that they could still achieve production that we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa's teammate, since we're talking a lot about the Chargers today, he's actually the very top of the second tier, the very good tier, and he's the first one there. So sort of ranked as the number 5th edge player in the NFL. And there's a lot of older players that kind of were in the elite tier that are now in the second tier in this group. Von Miller and Chandler Jones, and Danielle Hunter's been doing it for a long time now, 7th year in the NFL. Cam Jordan and Robert Quinn have been in the league for 12 years. It's hard to believe that those guys have been around that long. So yeah, all Miller, Jones, Jordan, Quinn have all been in the league over a decade now.
So just looking at this, you mentioned there's 4 tiers. The Chargers are the only team that has someone in tier 1 and another guy, so that's remarkable to me. I was a little shocked that Mac was a top tier 2. And that it's a pretty bulky tier, at his age. But what's interesting to me too, when you look at this list, is 3 of the top 4 at top tier 2 are between 31 and 33 years old. I mean, Chandler Jones, Khalil Mack, and Von Miller, several of them are going to end up in the Hall of Fame, if not all. But now they're more technicians than athletes, like we kind of talked about that, going back and forth, where I look at this tier and I see 2 young guys, Micah Parsons, which would be hard to rank, and Rashawn Gary, and think if anyone in tier 2 ends up in tier 1 next year, it'll be Parsons or Gary, who are still working on the technique part.
And I'm really glad Brandon Thorn has Micah Parsons listed as an edge.
Yeah, me too.
Going into his second year, because he is an edge, and that's so much more valuable than the off-ball linebacker ability that he can give you. So to me, he's an edge first, and then you utilize some of his skills in other ways to, just confuse offenses and move him around. And you can use him in other ways. But if he's not rushing the passer, I don't think you're getting the max value of what Micah Parsons gives you. And he's already very high in that second tier, the very good tier. And as some of these older players in their 30s fall off of this list completely, you're going to have Micah Parsons coming up, and you have a lot of other guys. So the list is probably going to look a lot different here in a year or so, because we're seeing a different generation. All the elite guys are still young and in their 20s and in their prime, but guys like Micah Parsons are coming up, where a lot of these dudes in their 30s in the very good tier are going to be dropping off. So who's going to be in this second tier in a couple of years? It's hard to envision. I think it's got these young guys, Chase Young and Brian Burns, and some of those players have to, Hutchinson, is he going to jump into that list? So some of the young guys got to really show up, because there's been some, we're talking about Hall of Famers that are going to be dropping off the list pretty soon.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mentioned that there 3 of the top 4 were over 30, 31 or older, but 6 of these 10 guys in tier 2 are in their 30s. So that's not going to hold up. And I do think 2 names, the ones you threw out, Burns and Chase Young, are the ones most likely to jump up into that tier 2, rookies aside.
couple other younger players in tier 2 in Max Crosby and Rashawn Gary. Rashawn Gary really solidifying himself last year as one of the top edge guys in the NFL when we were not sure about him. And I wasn't sure about him coming out either. And, talent reigns. And so that's why some freakiness definitely does help when it comes to these edge guys. You start putting some technique with it. If you've got a motor and you're one of those athletes where there's not very many in the world, you're extremely valuable here. And looking at tier 3, Brian Burns is there. I think he will be in tier 2 by next year.
By far the youngest tier 3 guy.
Yes, and the rest of the year, the rest of the tier 3 guys, I don't know if I think
they may have hit their head on the ceiling. Yeah,
they're kind of where they're going to be. I think.
Yeah, I think so too. They're all 27-ish. Judon, those type of guys, good players. I just don't know that their best is ahead of them still.
Absolutely. And then the last tier here, which is 3 players, which is the solid traits with flashes for more. And it's Chase Young, Preston Smith of the Packers, and Josh Sweat of the Eagles. And of course, Chase Young, he was supposed to be the dude. He's the top player in the NFL draft. Looked like he was going to be a star. Last year had the injury. So what is he going to look like this year? It's so important to the Commanders and important to a list like this because he could be very much in the elite category because he does have those elite traits.
Yeah, a tier 4 player is great, but for all the reasons you just said, Chase Young can't stay in tier 4. If he's in tier 4 here next year, you start to get real concerned. He needs to be in tier 2. He has potential to be in tier 1. Tier 4 isn't going to cut it for that guy.
Right, he needs to roll out of bed in tier 2 just because what he has physically.
He's a predator.
Yeah. Next, let's check in on the tier lists for defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen. And this list makes me laugh because one player, and you could probably guess who that player is, kind of breaks the system. We'll get to defensive tackles next. But you can bet on any of these guys over-unders on sacks. I mean, I already put money down on the over of 12 sacks for Nick Bosa in 2022. I think he's going to have a phenomenal year. You can bet on
is only 12.5. Actually, it's 12.75. I mean, we all bet the over on that one around here too.
He almost doubled it last year.
Right. Yeah, I don't get that.
And you can find those types of odds and lines, and you can find you can bet on defensive player of the year. You can bet on your team to win the Super Bowl. You can bet on coach of the year. You can bet on a coach to get fired at BetOnline, and you can find lines not only for the preseason games all the way through week 16 of the regular season. They've got lines already up for 2022 NFL at betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Not only NFL, but Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, golf, live in-game betting. And BetOnline continues to be a top online resource, not just for sports wagering, but information as well. Find reviews and news of every league and get yourself a little bit of an edge at BetOnline before you bet. So get over to BetOnline today. Use your desktop or mobile device to learn more about the trends in action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Defensive tackles, and I love this from Brandon Thorn. Instead of just putting Aaron Donald at the top of the elite list, he just invented a new category. So there's
Elite's
5.
Not good enough for this guy.
There's 5 tiers for defensive tackles, and there's one man alone in a tier above elite, which has been dubbed the unrivaled tier, and that is Aaron Donald in his 9th year at 31 years of age. He just breaks the system.
He really does. I mean, I was just reading the write-up real quick, and I'm just going to put one little blurb here. I mean, over the last 5 seasons, Donald leads all defensive linemen, not defensive tackles, in sacks, hurries, and pressures. I mean, he has 100 more pressures than Chandler Jones, who's second in the last 5 years. 100 more pressures than number 2. I mean, that's bonkers. And I really think Donald at this point isn't competing against the, quote, elites that we're going to get to. I think he's competing against Bob Lilly and Joe Green and who's the best defensive tackle that's ever walked the earth,
Yep, that's where Aaron Donald is right now.
Yep.
As far as the elite tier goes, there are 4 players in this tier. And there's a significant drop. These are really nice players, but they just don't have the impact that an Aaron Donald has on a game-to-game basis and a play-in, play-out basis. Chris Jones, Jonathan Allen, Cam Hayward, and DeForest Buckner make up the next tier of guys. And I'm glad Brandon Thorn put a separate tier up there because I think there is a clear difference. And those are really good players, but Aaron Donald's just a different dude. And it's funny because that defensive tackle money has gone up a lot. But when I really think about edge guys and tackles, I would pay probably half of the list we just talked about of guys. I would pay the top 2 tiers and maybe tier 3 and 4 before I paid anybody after Aaron Donald on the defensive tackle list, just because of impact that they give you off the edge and how hard it is to find those guys versus a defensive tackle list. I'm sure was a lot more difficult for Brandon Thorn to put together because you can make arguments that any of these guys are in those tiers behind Aaron Donald.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that as well. 2 nuggets about these 4 elite dudes. I was really happy to see Jonathan Allen in there. We were just talking about Chase Young. He needs to be in the elite for Washington. Well, Allen's already there, but few recognize it. And, of course, Brandon's all over it. Massive impact player that rarely gets this kind of love. And then I'm going to fight Brandon a little bit, too, is the best guy in tier 3 is Jeffrey Simmons, who strangely is one of the only guys on here that's 25 or younger. He is the only guy 25 or younger. I think I would have him second overall. I would have him atop the elite tier. I think Simmons is a superstar.
All right, we're seeing this the same way, Matt, because that was going to be my big point here was that Jeffrey Simmons I thought was a tier 2 low. And he's the best game wrecker on this list right now today after Aaron Donald.
I agree. It's funny we both thought that, but he would be 2 for me. I thought that was going to be controversial.
I think it's interesting. The 49ers could have had 2 players on this list. They traded away DeForest Buckner so they could keep Eric Armstead, but Eric Armstead has made pretty good on it. I think I do have Buckner 1 tier ahead of Armstead, so I agree there. But Eric Armstead here is number 7, 8 on this list, and he's had a nice little career. And so the 49ers might have done something right, not paying Buckner, paying Armstead. I don't know how they used the draft pick that they got for Buckner, because they should have just shoveled Eric Armstead right into Buckner's spot and then been done with it and used that pick somewhere else. But they ended up drafting Javon Kinlaw, and it's a big year for Kinlaw. We'll find out, talent-wise, he should be on this list somewhere, but he obviously hasn't so far in his career. The only team that I can tell, there's 2 teams actually that have 2 players.
Eagles.
In the top 4 tiers here, and that is the Eagles and the Titans.
Yeah. Okay.
Nico Autry comes in the good above average tier for the Tennessee Titans, and Fletcher Cox, who's kind of fallen down the list a little bit. He's been a really good player for a long time, and would surely have been in a tier higher than the good above average tier in years past. And then Javon Hargrave has actually leapfrogged him, and he's in the very good tier here, and that's a really good combo of interior defensive linemen.
Yeah, and then you throw Jordan Davis in the mix. Holy smokes,
that's
not too bad.
Yeah, Jordan Davis, what's he going to look like? What's his usage going to be? Some odd front stuff for the Eagles this year. What packages are going to be a part of? He's not going to be quite an every down player, most likely, just like he was at Georgia. But, man, just seeing what he can do and seeing some clips from camp, he's probably going to be somewhat similar to what we're seeing with Vita Vea, who comes in at the bottom of this list at number 15 and is in the good above average tier, but it's only because he's not a 3-down player and not quite the pass rusher that some of the other guys are.
Which I understand, but I would probably put Vea higher just because if I'm a center or a guard or an offensive coordinator, I think I'd rather play against Autry or Leonard Williams than I would Vita Vea. But I understand he's just not on the field as much as some of these guys. I do find it interesting, though, that like 95% of these guys are all second contract players. They're all 28 into their 30s. So it makes me take a step back and think the technical aspect, the technique aspect, like we talked about with the edge, might be more important for D tackles than I initially thought.
And I think Brandon Thorn errs on that side. I think he appreciates the guys who are technically sound, doing the dirty work that might not always show up in the flashy stats department, that might not always show up in the height, weight, speed numbers, even though a lot of those guys have it really with both end and tackle here on these lists. So, and you got to go check out all of Brandon Thorn's work. It's fantastic. Read all the write-ups about all these linemen and his ideas on why they rank where they rank. But it's a good point, Matt. Jeffrey Simmons is the only guy below the age of 26 on this list. Where are the next young superstar interior defensive linemen?
Yeah, one name that's
young guys on the edge list.
There is, and one name that's not listed here that I would be shocked if he isn't going forward is Quinnen Williams with the Jets, and that would go a really long way. back to your Niner roots, you understand the value of defensive linemen in that system. But I think he'll be the straw that serves the drink in New York.
Thanks, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you're checking out Matt's Locked On Dynasty podcast. Get ready for those fantasy drafts. And Vinny Iyer, with 20 years experience, bringing you all the knowledge and getting you prepped for your fantasy football drafts and Locked On Fantasy Football. Matt and I back tomorrow right here, Peacock and Williamson.